Hi, everybody. I'm back again. Hold on. I have to reposition. Oh no. Uh-huh. Sorry about I'm coming from a different area. Coming from the living room today because I'm just on the couch. Any rate, I figured, yeah, well, I definitely needed to be on the couch just for reasons. Anyway, for those of you who are just tuning in, hello. Um, We are now on the 19th chapter of a story. So, like I said, if this is your first time tuning in, then I highly recommend going back to the first part of our of the story and going through there. For those of you who are not, then I'm going to try again to do what I did last night and read three chapters. We will see how that works out. I'm sorry, YouTube. I should have probably positioned the screen better before I went in, but I can't really do that on live episodes until I've actually started recording, which by then it's a little too late. But that's the way it is, and I don't want to actually uh, move the other. I have a really weird setup right now, so this is how it's going to be for right now. Um, just bear with me for tonight. Hopefully, tomorrow night we'll be back to regular places. So I'm going to start off, and if you hear any background, it's because I'm in the living room. I'm not usually in my nice little hidey hole. So I also will be marking up, and today you may actually be able to see me marking up. YouTube will anyway because of the way that I am, filming today. Because usually it's higher up, and so you don't really see the clipboard. But today you'll see the clipboard. Um, yeah, and because I have three chapters to read and edit tonight, I will just jump right into it. Um, the name of the story is called The Saga of Haram, and this is chapter 19. Haram stared in bafflement. She is not here? Even as he, sorry, and yeah, my quick little recap. When last we left our hero, for lack of a better term, the princess is in another castle. Haram stared in bafflement. She is not here? Even as he spoke, he realized that he was speaking foolishness. Lavad's reaction said as clear as shouted words, Teriel was not there. The merchant, irritable at the disappointment, responded sharply. Nay, she is not here, and if you have no news of her, why have you come? Hoping to talk another reward out of me? I'll be bound. No such thing. They'll tell you at the inn that I'm not short of money. I came merely to pay my respects out of politeness. He emphasized the last word, but realized as the words were coming out that he did not know for sure why they had come. Lavad, at the reference to politeness, took a deep breath. Yes, of course. Come in. Let me at least offer you a glass of wine. They sat round the table, eyeing each other uncomfortably, until the wine was poured. When the servant had retired, the merchant stretched out a long fingered hand, raised the cup, took a sip. Haram did likewise. After sitting in silence for a while, Lavad spoke. After he brought her back, she insisted on learning to defend herself. I finally gave in to the extent of buying her a sword and having a man come in to give her lessons. Last year she left. In the middle of the day, while no one was about, she called a servant to her. She said she was off to become a venturer, and the servant should tell me not to worry. Before the servant could have a word brought to me, she was far down the trail. I sent out men to track her and bring her back, but she evaded them. I don't know how, and we have not seen or heard her since. There was one time, 3 months ago, that a merchant brought back a rumor from over in Rahassan that a young woman named Terali, as he heard it, had been involved in the slaying of some monster or other. Perhaps it was her, Perhaps it was not. And you have heard nothing of her? Karen paused a moment to remember all the stories and rumors that had gone around Ifan Sur regarding adventurers and their adventures. Some women had been spoken of, but none with a name even similar to Teriel. He shook his head. Nay, I have heard nothing, but I promise you, I'll make a point of seeking out news of her, and if I hear anything, I'll send word to you. The thing is, said Levad, that I am not certain how I feel. At times I am angry that she could do such a thing to the one who loves her best, and at other times I only wish I knew she was in good health, wherever she is. Perhaps it makes no sense to you. Thinking of his own ambivalent attitudes towards his comrade's good fortune, Harem nodded. I understand, perhaps better than you think. If you do see her, tell her that her father misses her. Tell her to come back, even if for a day or two, simply to comfort an old man's heart. Harem's own heart was heavy as he went back to the inn that night. In the morning, he tried to think what to do next. Why had Teriel gone off so? She had no need to become a venturer. Father was a wealthy merchant. He could buy her whatever she wished. And now she was gone, just as Oritz, Sagahan, Astra, Merit, and all the others were gone. He sat musing on this, becoming more and more morose, until a whole day had passed. He noticed that the innkeeper and his staff walked carefully around him, and he wondered what they were seeing in him, what seemed so dangerous about him. At last, late in the evening, the innkeeper approached him cautiously. Are you sure you actually want more ale, young sir? Of course, didn't I just order it? Yes, certainly you did. But you've been drinking ale all day, eating little or nothing, and looking like a black cloud full of thunder and lightning. That's a combination which leads to trouble often as not, and I wish no trouble in this place. Trouble? I've given you no trouble yet, innkeeper, and I'll give you no trouble so long as you continue to bring my ale. The innkeeper shook his head firmly. No more ale this night, young sir. Harem put a hand on his sword, glowering up at the innkeeper. He was suddenly reminded of Astran berating Oritz for getting drunk and making such trouble in the town of Ninantha on a previous visit, that they dare not pass through it. He grimaced, then forced a smile onto his face. And why should there be any trouble between us? For certain, you'll still have ale tomorrow, and that is another day, and I shall be going to bed. He hauled himself upright again, as the innkeeper moved back slightly, still watching him carefully. Harem discovered that he was not particularly steady on his feet, and that brought him to consider what would have happened if he had drawn his sword there. Be lucky not to run myself through, he muttered, smiling ruefully. For all that, he made his own way to his bed. His sleep, however, was troubled with dreams which fled at his wakening, and left him with only a feeling of unease. He stood in the morning with the eyes of drinking so much ale the day before. With an aching head and a churning stomach, he saddled his horse. He set out northward from town, and was shortly drowsing in the saddle, trusting the horse to follow the road. It was about noon when he suddenly noticed an oak grove coming up on their right. Best of my knowledge, he's the only one here, so give me a minute here. On his right, and knew where he was. He pulled the horse to a stop. By Tran and Viren, horse! Would you lead me to my death? We are in Shandakar. For a brief moment, he would have turned the horse and galloped into the opposite direction. Then his good sense came to the fore. If he were not mistaken, Brauha and his minions worked mostly in darkness, so the brightness of day should hold no dangers for him. So long as he did not stay beyond nightfall, all should be well. He swung himself down out of the saddle, grimacing as his legs nearly buckled under him. He shuffled around a little, recovering the use of his limbs, and wondered whether Corinnes still lived there, or whether he had been replaced by another druid. He unslung a water skin from his saddle, and had just taken the first sip when his horse whinnied and was answered from inside the grove. Haram looked up. His horse was directly between him and the grove, covering most of his body. His first impulse was to reach for his bow, but to string it would warn whoever was in the grove, that he was preparing to fight. Instead, he reached into his pouch, took out his sling, and one of the smooth pebbles he had collected along the way. He continued to look across the horse withers into the grove, but he could see nothing. Bandits would certainly try not to harm the horse, since it was a very valuable animal. They might be tempted into a long shot at Haram's head or upper body eventually, but they would wait a while even for that. He saw no movement in the woods, but a man suddenly there at the edge of the grove, a tall man clad in a brown robe. Haram stepped from behind his horse. Corinnes! The other nodded. And you are Haram the Adventurer, a little older and more experienced behind you. What brings you here? No, not meow. Haram grimaced. I was drowsing in the saddle, trusting my horse to know the trail north from Howardus, forgetting that the trail forks, with one branch of it leading off into Shandakar. Corinnes nodded. Many times animals will find their way to this grove, in particular if they're hurt or distressed. So you did not seek me out? By Tran and Vera, no. I have an amulet against the god of lies, but of my own will I wouldn't trust it so near to his own territory. At least I assume that the Lord of Shabnazdig is continuing his work. He is. They stood in silence for a while, until Haram began to feel a little uncomfortable. He extended his hand with the water skin. I have little to offer in way of hospitality, but if you care for a drink of water, I have that. The druid smiled. A drink of water would be welcome. He strode forward and took the water skin. He took a short swallow, then handed it back. In fact, it is I ought to be offering hospitality, this being my home. But if you had come into my grove, would you have to put aside your iron armor and your iron weapons? But if you would come into my grove, you would have to put aside your iron armor and your iron weapons. Does that offend you? Haram smiled. Nay, not at all. As a guest in your home, ought I not to comply with the wishes of my host? If you wish to unsaddle your horse and set the saddle with your other things there by yonder tree, the horse might come into the grove, and no one will touch your equipment while you stay with me. As he put off his armor, Haram wondered for a moment if this might be a trap, but he quickly dismissed that notion. Everything he had heard of druids said that they were straightforward persons, and that any harm they did was done openly, in response to provocation, and not slyly. He could think of nothing he had done to provoke Corinnes. He followed the druid back into the grove, noticing that it seemed to be full of wildlife. They come here, said Corinnes in response to the question Haram did not ask. Mostly out of need, and then they stay for longer or shorter times, then go on their ways again. But do they lose their fear of men staying here? One might think they would thus make themselves easier prey to hunters. Karanis laughed. No, that is not the way of this grove. Sometimes I try to heal the worst of their hurts, as the god guides me. But for the most, they do not seem to know that I am here at all. And what of me? Will they not take fright from me? Or will the grove cover me with its cloak as well? All my experience heretofore says that they will not likely notice you either. Do not fear, Harem. If I thought you would be a disturbance to my grove, I never would have invited you in. A little ways inside the grove, there was a rough cabin, small but weather-tight. There was a well outside with a stone-built casement and a wooden bucket attached to a short rope. The cabin was built for the use of one person. A neat bedroll rolled up at one wall, a small table and two chairs, and in the fireplace a bronze kettle was staying warm by the fire. One of the walls was completely covered by a curtain of rough cloth. Be seated. Hiram pulled out one of the chairs and sat down. Do you have company from time to time, then? Karanis looked around. Ah, the two chairs and all. Yes, from time to time I have visitors here. There are some folk of the countryside who come to me for healing and the like. Though I'm not a healer by profession, I do not like to turn away those truly in need. They have learned, though, not to come for love potions or curses on their neighbors. There was something in his voice which made Harem very glad he had not come for a love potion or a curse. The stew was good, with large lumps of meat in it. Harem looked at it, then looked at Karanis. Yes, it is meat. Did you think it forbidden to us? Nay, creatures of the wild eat meat, and the god is a god of nature as it is, not as some city dweller might like it to be. And no, there is no hunting allowed in this grove, not even for myself. But there is a great expanse of land outside this grove, where I can and do hunt. All that the god forbids is waste. Kill what you cannot use. To kill what you cannot use. When they had finished eating, Karanis said, Now then, tell me of yourself. What has happened to your companions? Dead, said Harem shortly. Ah, indeed. And how did that happen? Goblins ambushed us in the morning, said Harem, wishing that the druid would cease asking such questions. But Karanis appeared not to notice Harem's brusque answer. And you? How did you escape this ambush? I was knocked on the head during the fight, and when I came to myself again, the fight was over and the goblins were dividing up the spoil. When they found me still living, they kept me for a slave. After about a year, I was rescued when they accidentally encountered another band of adventurers. He was surprised that I could keep his voice so steady speaking of these things. Karanis nodded quietly, as though this was all merely confirmation of something he already had known. Have you been alone since? Harem shook his head. Nay, I was with the band who rescued me, first as merely a companion, then as a full member. And why did you come here? Did you not know that the god of lies will still be seeking you? Yes, I knew that. But as I already said, I have an amulet which is supposed to offer me protection, and I had not planned to stay long, nor to come so close to his dominions. I intended to visit with Teriel, the girl we had rescued. But I hear from her father she has gone off to become a venturer. The druid nodded gravely. Yes, she came by here on her way. She'd been taught to handle a sword, but other than that, she had few skills and little knowledge. She hoped that I would be able to teach her the sorts of things she would need to know. There was little I could do for her. Most of the magic I know is the sort that takes years to learn. I gave her such advice as I could, and taught her one or two things, mostly the lore of plants, and she was on her way. I have heard nothing of her since. They sat in silence for a time. Finally, the druid asked, "What of you? Where do you go from here?" Harum shrugged. "For some time now, I have not been planning beyond the immediate day, or sometimes as much as a week. I have no plans, no goals. If I truly need money, I have money being held for me in Ifa and Sor. I suppose I shall go back to Eridar and travel the roads to see what changes and chances might come upon me. So, let us go outside. The day is too fine to be wasted indoors." They went outside then, and sat on a bench beside the wall of the house, talking of this and that. Karanis knew much of the world outside his grove, and Harem remarked on it. "How should I not know all these things? You remember I told you that people can't come by and for help and healing on occasion. Oftentimes they'll talk of a number of things beside their troubles. If one listens, one learns." There is a whinny and a sound of a horse moving up beside the cabin. Harem thought at first it was his horse seeking him out, but when the head came around the corner, it was only a pony. Harem glanced at it, then stared at the familiar pony face. He jumped to his feet. "Arkwelt!" he shouted. And for those of you who were listening earlier, you would know that Arkwelt is the name of Harem's pony that he had when he was with the team. So that would be chapter 19 complete. Alrighty. There's very little scene breaks in that one, so give me a minute here. Alrighty. And on to chapter 20. And I'm sorry, YouTube, I will try not to put this up like this. I'm going to try. I'll try. Can't promise anything. The pony ambled over to Harem, who put his arms around the beast's neck and wept. Wept as he had never dared to do while a captive of the goblins. Wept for jovial Oritz, fiery Asteran, pedantic Sagahan. "So you managed to escape," he said finally. "You were not eaten by goblins, then?" Arkwelt, being unable to answer such questions in words, nuzzled his head against Harem's chest in the fashion which meant that, whatever else might be going on in the world, he expected to be fed. "So you think you ought to be fed, do you? Shame on you, then, with that stomach so fat as yours. Wanting to be fed again? Nay, it will do you no good to bump against me. I have nothing to feed you." Karanis was smiling. "He came to me last year, he and a large black beast. I was sure I had recognized them, but I had wished to be certain that you had not merely abandoned him somewhere. The big black was in terrible condition. Wolves had been at him, and his right, nope, that's not right. His right left leg was lagging. Likely right hind leg is what I'm thinking. And now it's canon. Who knew? I thought I might be able to save his life, but he would only live a life of misery after. So I gave him mercy and killed him as quickly as could be. The pony, aside from a few scrapes and scratches, and aside from being thin as a rail, was still hale. So I have kept him here. Harem dried his face. The sorrow for dead companions was still inside, but seemingly more manageable now. You didn't think I had abandoned him? Nay, I didn't think that of you, but you will remember that we were together for 1 day and 1 night, and there was much else happening as well. And I have lived so long because I learned long ago the folly of judging people too quickly, either for good or for ill. The big black would have been Orist's horse. His last memory of Orist, sore, wounded, and still fighting like a bear at bay, came near to bringing fresh tears to his eyes. Yes, as I remember it. And that was another reason for not believing that the horses had been abandoned. The Chandagranian would not have abandoned his horse, though he himself must starve. The others are dead, then? The goblins came upon us in early morning, said Haram. We woke fighting. In the battle, I was struck across the head with an iron-shod spear butt. The fellow who struck me clearly thought he'd killed me, or he would have run me through to make sure. Perhaps his attention was attracted elsewhere before he could make the stroke. However it was, I woke to find the others dead, and myself in the midst of a band of goblins. I never saw the horses, but I am sure that at least one of them was killed by the goblins for meat. And once again, you are alone? Yes, I am. Harem thought about that. There was a young fellow, Merritt, a close friend of mine, who joined Orit's band at the same time as I. But we came across Saradon's band in our travels, and he arranged a place for himself there. He went on to explain how Merritt had agreed to arm wrestle for the place with Saradon, and how he'd ensured his success. And so my best friend left me, and cheated me in order to do so. A thought suddenly struck him, and he looked up at the druid. You know, I think I have even blamed Oritz and the others for deserting me as well. Foolish foolishness, for they died in fighting, as I nearly did myself. And then I also blame Voraspan for deserting me. In their case, they merely decided they had sufficient money to fulfill lifelong ambitions. And since I had no particular goal in mind, I was left alone. Would you not call that foolishness? But Karanis only smiled. Are you quite without plans, then? As near as as near to it as makes no difference, answered Harem. The only plan I have in mind is to attempt to avoid the swordsmen who have been sent to kill me. Swordsmen? Sent by the gods, by the servants of lies, I suppose? Exactly. Harem was about to ask Karanis how Karanis could know who sent the killers, but realized before he spoke that would be a foolish question. Instead, he said, twice so far I've been attacked, and twice I've managed to survive. If I stay in one place, they will surely find me. If I continue to move, it will at least take a little longer for them to track me down. Beware, Harem. I am always careful. Ah, but I suggest you be aware of more than swordsmen. Beware of more than swordsmen. By this time, they will be made aware that two swordsmen have failed, and they'll be trying other methods. Footpads, common thieves, persons shooting from ambush, that sort of thing. Will they be aware so soon? How could news have passed so quickly? You forget. These are servants of a god. They have ways and means which are not available to ordinary folk. Harem nodded. That made some sense indeed. So, I shall be aware. And if you stand for one further piece of advice, I would suggest you find a comrade, one who will not be so daunted by who will not be daunted by being hunted by servants of the god of lies. Yes, said Harem. Bear is aback with no brother. The words of Oritz came automatically to his tongue, but they brought memories with them, and nearly started tears in his eyes again. Karanis was looking at him. That was something that Oritz used to say, Harum said, wiping his sleeve across his eyes. After so long a time without giving more than a second thought to them, I find suddenly that I weep like a babe if but remember the least little thing about them. They were good people. Good people? Yes, they were good people. They had their faults, to be sure, but they did their best by me, and I tried to do my best by them. And if one does one's best for his companions, is there any more that he can be reasonably asked to do? Harum nodded. So do I say to myself, and yet sometimes I wonder if there was more I could have done. For a moment they sat in silence. Then Harum got up and drew water from the well, washed his face, and said, Best I be going, I think. Even though you do not know where? I know where now. I will go out and see if I can find Teriel. If I find her, I will try to convince her to go home and visit her father, or at least send him word from time to time that she is well. And the pony? I'm of two minds there. If I seek to take him with me, will he truly come? Or would it not be better to leave him here in relative safety? That is a decision with which I cannot help you. Unless I mistreat him, Harum said with a smile. Unless you mistreat him, agreed Krennis with an answering smile. So, let us first see if he wishes to come. Harum stood and began to walk out of the grove. As he walked, he called to Arkwelt, and the pony trotted agreeably after him. It would seem he still considers himself your pony, said the druid. It would seem so. Farewell, Krennis, and my thanks for your hospitality. Farewell, Harum. Perhaps we will meet again. Perhaps. Privately, Harum thought that there was little chance of that. Pure accident had brought him so near to the domain of the god of lies, and he doubted that any such chance would happen again. He came to the edge of the grove, recovered his arms and armor, saddled his horse, and he was on his way. Think we mean pony? That is the question here. Because he also now has two horses. Well, he has a pony and a horse. After a bit more than a week of uneventful riding of the dusty gray roads, Harum came to Intellis, on the border of Yosanar, the northernmost of the kingdoms which made up Eridar. He dismounted and led his horse and the pony Arkwelt down the main street, searching for the inn. As he went, he felt a bumping at his hip, where his wallet hung. Whipping around, he drew his sword. The fellow who stood there was several years older than Harum, wearing a rough brown homespun, and leaning on a homemade crutch of inferior quality. Whatever Harum would have done was forestalled by the potter in his stall at the edge of the street, who shouted, Ho, thief! Dun, dun, dun. Give me a second here while I try and turn the page. Having said that, that was a short chapter. Okay. Last chapter, everybody. For tonight, anyway. For tonight. And it's a nice thick one. So there we go. Chapter 21. Suddenly there was a raging mob around the lame man. Out of the stalls and shops they rushed, knocking the crippled man down and jostling for the privilege of kicking him. Haram hesitated a moment. This was none of his affair, was it? But there was something about the scene reminiscent of the way the goblins acted. That thought settled the matter for him. He vaulted into his saddle and turned the horse, riding him straight into the struggling mass. "Stop this!" he shouted. "Stop! Stop! There was no theft. Get back now!" The force, the the horse forced some of them back, but Haram was forced to use the fat of his sword as well to discourage others. Sorry, the flat of his sword to discourage others. Finally, he had driven them back, though they stood glaring at the pair of them. Then the potter who had started it all, a squat fellow with a red face and a thick thatch of hair to match, stood forward. "The half-elf bastard's a thief, sir, and ought to be dealt with." "A thief, is he? And what has he stolen?" "Why, he was at your own wallet, sir. Did you not notice?" "Oh, aye, I noticed. But there's nothing taken, unless this fellow is able to take money from a wallet and close it up again, without the owner of the wallet being any the wiser. And if there's no theft, who, then what were you about? What you were about was murder, no less." "Murder? Murder, you say? Why, what else would you call it, when an innocent man is killed? Now be off about your business and let me tend to mine." For a time it seemed as though they would defy Haram, sword or no. They stood round him, muttering and growling, waiting for someone to lead them. Finally the potter snorted. "Let it be, then. If he will decide to save the life of a thief, so be it. And some time he will soon regret it." He turned back to his stall, and the others began to drift away as well. At least until at last Haram was left with his two horses and the crippled man on the ground. Haram dismounted. He extended a hand to help the lame man to his feet, surveying him as he rose. He was no taller than Haram when he stood erect, with a fine frame and long, slender arms and hands. His hair was fair, and his lower leg was bound in splints. "Had you asked me, I would have probably given you a coin or two. There was no need for theft." The lame man smiled wryly. "I suppose it's the effect of this village. They don't like me here, you see, and I felt no great hope that you would be any different." "And why don't they like you here?" The other shrugged. "That's the long tale. Too long to be told standing here in the street. But if you buy me a bit of bread and meat at the inn, I'll be happy to entertain you with my misfortunes." Haram laughed. "You lack little for boldness at any rate. Come along, let me feed you and hear your story." As they made their way to the inn, he asked, "What can I call you?" "I was called Dareth Gan by my mother, and have been called worse names since." "Dareth Gan it is, then, and I am Haram." "Haram, you say?" "Yes, what of it?" "Nothing. Only I seem to remember hearing of the name in connection with the killing of an ogre to the south of here." "Yes, that was some time ago, and I was with Ort's band." By this time they had come to the inn. The landlord may not wish to have me inside here, said Dareth Gan. Ah, but perhaps I can change his mind, said Haram. And indeed, as soon as Gan stepped through the door, the landlord was rushing over, frowning at him. Get out, you beggar! I give nothing to worthless vagrants. Haram stepped forward. This man is my guest, landlord. Unless you desire me to take my custom elsewhere. He drew a gold coin from his wallet and held it up so the landlord could see it. The landlord looked from the coin to Dareth Gan and back again, and then looked at Haram. No, sir, you are welcome here indeed, sir. But do you know who it is that you call a guest? Haram set a hand on his sword hilt. Yes, I know his name is Dareth Gan, and I also know that I do not like to find myself challenged by every fat fool in town. Bring us ale and food, and do it at once. The landlord turned pale and quivered. At once, sir. He fled for his kitchen. The food and drink were brought out shortly, and Dareth Gan went to work on it. After he had eaten and drunk a bit as well, Haram looked over at the lame man and said, Well, you promised me a story. Will you tell it now? Dareth Gan returned his look. It is something of a long story, if you have the patience, and it must begin with my beginning, if you will. My father was an elf of the woods, up in Trethisian. He met my mother at a fair, and fell in love with her. But he could not stay with her, nor could he take her with him immediately, for there was some sort of contention taking place among the elves at the time. But he promised my mother that he would return, leaving her a ring in token of that promise. He never did return, and we never knew what happened, though rumors did come out of the woods that he had died in some sort of feud. However it was, I was born without a father. My mother did her best for me, and her own father stood by her, keeping the two of us as though there had actually been a marriage. When grandfather died, however, it became more difficult, for my eldest uncle had little love for elves at all, and he claimed that my existence was a shame to the family. In the end, he drove mother out. We wandered after that. My mother was a skilled weaver and could work at her trade wherever she set up her loom. Unfortunately, she could not change my features, nor alter the fact that my father was not present. We would stay a few months or a year in a town, long enough to almost become established. Then rumors would begin to spread, and eventually ill feeling would mount to the point where we would be forced to travel on. To have a bastard son, that was one thing. It might well have been overcome with time. But a bastard half-elven son? That was something else indeed. Something to be mistrusted and distrusted and driven out. He took a long drink from his ale mug and went on. By the time I was 8 years old, I'd begun to understand why we were always moving. But there was nothing I could do to prevent it. When I was 9 years, I became apprenticed to one of the hidden folk. Do you know of them? Haram nodded. He had indeed heard of the hidden folk. Master spies and assassins with abilities some swore were magical, while others maintained they were no more than carefully learned physical tricks. Dareth Gan looked at him carefully. Yes, no doubt you have heard of us. And all sorts of tales, rumors, and downright lies. However, when I left my mother, as I reasoned, that would leave her free of the stigma of my presence, free to settle down and stay in one town forever. I served my apprenticeship well, learned all my master's skills, and was allowed to go out on my own. I will not tell you of my exploits. Better for you that you know nothing of the things I have done. In any case, after some years, I finished up here, in this town. And have you been wondering why I admitted to you that I was one of the hidden folk? We do not make ourselves known, save when we are seeking to be hired, and then to only as few as possible. In this case, it would do me no good to hide my trade from you, for the whole village knows it, and would be sure to tell you if I did not. There is a wise woman here in the village, old Cora by name, and on the night I took room at this inn, she sought me out. She had never seen me before, I am sure, but before the whole company she announced, "You are Darth Gann, one of the folk who calls themselves hidden. You shall not leave this village unscathed or alone." He frowned into his ale, which was practically gone, and Hiram signaled the landlord for more. When it was brought, Dareth Gann went on with the story. I know not whether she was placing a curse or merely a foretelling. Whichever it was, as I was riding out of town the next day, my horse stumbled and fell. Ordinarily, I would have escaped something like that with no more than a bruise or two, but this time I broke my leg. Worse still, my horse broke his leg as well and had to be killed. As for myself, old Cora set my leg and put it into splints, and I made a crutch to get around on. But I am in no condition to walk for any distance, so I stayed in town. However, after my money was gone, I found life a bit more difficult. The villagers would neither feed nor house me without payment, and they insisted on money. I have a spare dagger and the like, but no one would buy them. Thus, without money, I was put into a distressing situation. And as for the villagers, you see that they are getting the best out of it. They escaped my money. They accepted my money while I had any, but now they hope I will either starve to death or be caught in the act of stealing, which will permit them to execute me legitimately. And incidentally, all my goods would be forfeit to the town. Haren's mouth tightened. You know, I have a mind to stay in this town for a while, to enjoy the hospitality. Would you be so kind as to be my guest in return for directing me to the local points of interest? The other suppressed a smile. Though not a native, I think I can show you everything this town has to offer. Perhaps the most noteworthy part is the road out, though we may want to save that for last. The next day, Hiram said, I would like to talk to this woman, old Cora. Well, she lives at the edge of town, and her place is easy enough to find. But what would you hope to achieve? A fair question, but one for which I do not have an answer. Just satisfaction of my curiosity, I suppose. Dareth Gann shrugged and led him to a cottage at the edge of town. A small thatch-roofed cottage with a fenced plot of vegetables and herbs out front. Harold had no idea what to expect, and would not have been surprised if Cora had condemned him for his meddling. She was a stout lady, old but still hale, gray hair tied back at the base of her neck with a leather cord, and she was working in her vegetable garden when they arrived. She looked up to see them come in, but did not greet them. Good afternoon to you, madam, Harum said politely, and a good afternoon to you as well. I see that you have found each other. Harum looked at Dareth Gann in surprise and found Dareth Gann looking back at him, equally surprised. When they looked at the old lady once more, she was smiling. She was smiling broadly. I see many things, she said. Is it surprising that I should also be able to see when one of them is fulfilled? She brushed back a wisp of hair that had escaped from the cord. You saw this? Demanded Dareth Gann. Why did you not say so rather than exposing my trade and putting a curse on me? But I did say so, and I put no curse on you. You recall. I said you would not leave this village unscathed or alone. It was a foretelling, not a curse. And now you are not unscathed and you are not alone. Well, why should I be singled out? Why a foretelling for me than anyone else? She beamed again. When I am told to speak, I speak. And I do not ask the why or wherefore. But I think I might hazard a guess. without offending the great old ones, sorry, the great ones. I would say that this man requires a companion, and I am to be his companion, whether I will it or no? Demanded Dareth. Hiram was thinking much the same thing. Cora chuckled. Oh, I imagine you could reject this fate if you wished, but you'd be going against the will of the great ones. This might entail suffering. Suffering? Dareth slapped his crutch against the splints of his leg. Suffering? Does this not count as suffering? If you think so, but you might ask your companion about suffering. It was Haram's turn to be mystified. And what do you know about me, and how? I know most of what Eridar knows. That you are Haram, and that the story has it that you've spent some time as a slave of goblins. But that is common knowledge, and the story has been going the rounds of the cities and towns for some time of Haram of the Grim Face. He was puzzled. My fame had escaped me. I hardly thought that I had done anything to be famous for. Not even surviving a year with the goblins? People have claimed fame on less grounds. Haram returned something she had said earlier. But you said the gods wanted us together. Why? As to that, that is the business of the gods themselves, and I seldom question their decisions. Would you not feel safer with a companion beside you? Yes, but I would as soon choose my own. Someone who is forced to join me willy-nilly is not likely to be the best companion when trouble comes. He turned to Dareth. Whatever the gods say, I do not insist that you follow me unless it is your will to do so. Dareth looked back at him and then smiled. Now, if I had anything better to do, I might accept that offer. But as it is, if you are willing, I will accompany you. At the very least, I owe you my life. As they made their way back to the inn, Haram spoke. I know little more than rumors about your people. You were the first one of the hidden folk I have ever met. Dareth shrugged as best he could while walking with the crutch. And that is why we are the hidden folk. Very few know who or what we are. He flashed a quick smile at Haram. They say you are assassins, killers for hire. Again came the shrug. Some are, some are not. We are trained in the use of the bow, sword, spear, knife, and many other weapons. Some make assassination their trade, but for the most part, we are spies. If a lord is planning to make war on his neighbor, he might hire one of us to see what preparations the neighbor is making. Or a lord might hire us to find out whether his neighbor was planning on making war on him. Or a merchant might hire us to look into the business of a competitor. As I say, some make their living by killing, but most do not. After a few moments, Dareth asked, And what of you? Is it true you were a slave of goblins for several years? Only a year, if that. That's not a time I like to think of. They came upon us in the morning, by surprise. In the battle I took a knock on the head. When I awoke, the goblins were plundering the dead. At first they were about to kill me, but then the leader gave me a choice. I might die, or I might live as a slave. I chose life. A wise choice. While one lives, one has a possibility of altering one's condition. Dead, one can do nothing. 3 nights later, they were 3 nights later, they were seated at the inn, amid the noise and the bustle. Smoke from the fire and from the torches on the walls curled up around the low wooden beams of the ceilings. And the same torches cast a flickering orange light over the scene. The landlord and his helpers were hurrying here and there. A merchant with a mule caravan, including muleteers, and caravan guards were staying the night in town, and it seemed that each and every one of them felt he should be served first. Hiram said to Dareth Gan, "Your leg appears much improved." "Much, thank you. What would you think of the notion of leaving this town tomorrow?" "Tomorrow? We could, but I am still lame, and I might hold up your traveling." "You may have noticed that, as well as my horse, I have a pony. The pony is trained for riding, if you'd be willing to ride him." "I have no argument with that, but we will have to find a riding tack for him. We will do that in the morning." In the morning, the innyard was all confusion, as the merchant was shouting orders intended to organize the confusion and set his train on the road. Hiram Dareth Gan set off for their local leather worker's shop. The leather worker was a tall, spare man, his red hair now turned almost completely white. He looked at Dareth Gan with distaste as the two entered his shop. "We'd like to trade this tack, built for a large horse, for something more suitable for my pony," said Hiram. "I will not deal with him," declared the leather worker. Hiram leaned forward, his left hand on the counter. "You may have heard," he said, striving to keep his voice conversational, "that I was a prisoner of goblins, and for a year or more forced to endure whatever cruelties they might put to me, simply because I was a human among goblins. All this has left me less tolerant of those who decide on some whim or another that another person is not fit to be dealt with. It has also left me subject to ungovernable rages. Such things are fine for the wilds, of course, but not so appropriate in towns. It would be a shame if your hands were to be broken and all your stock slashed to bits. Of course, I might be caught and hung for it, which would certainly help yourself and your family to endure difficult times until your hands were healed again. Look at my face, fool, and tell me I'm jesting." His last words were spoken in a sudden, sharp tone. The leather worker was suddenly less sure of himself. He began to show his stock, and eventually Dareth Gan had equipment for arc weld. Hiram held out a silver pony. The leather worker looked at it, then at Hiram. "Bad-tempered I may be, and hardly fit for the company of humans, but a thief I am not. New work for old is scarcely a fair trade. Take this as well." Mm-hmm. Definitely. Thank you for your help tonight. Much appreciated, Artemis. Dusty road. The dusty road they followed was marked by the traces and tracks of the merchant train that had preceded them some hours earlier. As they traveled casually eastward, the town of Lissenweir, they heard the sound of pounding hooves ahead. Over the hill and down toward them came a horse, wild-eyed and bleeding from several wounds. It evaded all their attempts to capture it, and as it rushed by, Hiram saw an arrow protruding from its shoulder. "Goblins!" he shouted. "You're certain?" He smiled bitterly. "If any man of Aradar could distinguish a goblin arrow at a glance, I think I would be that man." "What do we do then?" I will not speak for you. But ahead there are people under attack by goblins. I go to give what aid I can. He strung his bow and set out, noting that as he did so, Gareth Gann had strung a small black bow as well. It was not over the next hill, but over the next hill, and after that, they came upon the site of the fight. Of course, we don't find out what happens in that fight until tomorrow. So, thanks everybody for tuning in. YouTube, I'm really sorry about the film quality because it's not my usual lighting, so it's a little bit dark and gloomy. I'm sorry. And yeah, um, thank you everybody who's tuning in. Um, yeah, I will talk to you all again really soon. So, good night, YouTube. Okay.